The restaurant was quiet for a Friday night, a stark contrast to the usual noise that filled its high-ceilinged halls. Soft jazz played in the background, the clink of silverware and glasses, the only sounds breaking the stillness. It was a place where the rich came to dine in peace, their faces masked by wealth and privilege, and in the midst of it all stood Vanessa, her uniform neat, her face calm, but inside, her heart raced with every step she took. She approached the table where the man sat, his arrogance evident even from a distance. Dressed in a tailored suit, his watch glinting under the soft lighting, he exuded an air of superiority. His gaze flicked to her the moment she neared, a sneer curling on his lips. Vanessa knew that look well, the kind of look that made her stomach churn. She had seen it many times before, but it never got easier. "Excuse me," the billionaire began, his voice smooth and condescending, as if he were doing her a favor just by speaking to her. "I ordered the steak well done, not medium. Are you incapable of understanding basic instructions?" Vanessa blinked, but didn't let the sting of his words show on her face. She had learned long ago that showing weakness in front of people like him was a mistake. Her hands gripped the edge of the tray, steadying herself as she met his eyes. "I apologize, sir. I'll have the kitchen prepare a new one for you," she said, her voice steady, professional. Despite the knot in her stomach, the man scoffed, turning his attention to his drink, clearly uninterested in her apology. "Of course, you will," he muttered, waving her off as if she were nothing more than a servant. "Just get it right this time." Vanessa took a step back, her breath catching in her throat as she turned to leave, but something in her chest tightened. It wasn't the words that bothered her, it was the way he looked at her, like she didn't matter, like she was less than human, and she couldn't let that go. Not tonight. As she moved toward the kitchen, the murmur of voices around her grew louder, but all she could focus on was the sneer of the man she had just encountered. His face lingered in her mind, burning into her thoughts. The way he thought he could make her feel small. The way his words had cut deeper than the steak he had complained about. She had been in this business long enough to know the types of people who thought they could treat others like this. But tonight, something inside her snapped. A voice called out behind her, and she turned to see the restaurant manager, a middle-aged man who seemed more concerned with his own appearance than the needs of the staff. He smiled at her, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Vanessa, I need you to go back to that table. He's complaining again. Can you handle it?" Her heart sank. She could feel her patience wearing thin, but she nodded. "I'll take care of it," she said, her voice colder now. The walk back to the table felt longer this time, each step heavier than the last. When she arrived, the man barely looked up from his menu, his arrogance palpable as he flipped the pages carelessly, ignoring her presence. But Vanessa wasn't about to let him dismiss her like this again. She cleared her throat. "Sir, I've spoken to the kitchen, and your order will be prepared the way you wanted it," she said, her words firm but calm. The man's eyes flicked to her, a cruel smirk spreading across his face. He leaned back in his chair, almost as if to size her up, and then, in a voice meant only for her, he spoke in Arabic, a language she had learned as a child. "You know, it's strange," he said, his words dripping with disdain. "I never expected someone like you to understand anything about fine dining, let alone how to speak a language of sophistication." Vanessa froze, the words hitting her like a slap to the face. He thought she wouldn't understand him. He thought she was just another unimportant worker, someone whose worth was defined by the uniform she wore. But he had no idea who he was dealing with. The smirk on his face widened as he watched her, waiting for her reaction. He wanted her to feel small, to shrink under his gaze. And for a brief moment, it seemed as though he had succeeded. But then, slowly, she raised her head, her posture straightening, and a fire ignited in her chest, without missing a beat. Vanessa responded in fluent Arabic, her voice sharp and filled with an edge of defiance. "It's strange that you think you're the only one capable of sophistication, but here we are. You're still waiting for a meal that's not up to your standards." The man's eyes widened in surprise, his smirk faltering for the first time. Vanessa's words had come like a punch, delivered with the same icy calm that he had tried to use on her. The tension at the table thickened, and for a moment, the entire restaurant seemed to fall silent. The billionaire blinked, his lips parting as if to say something, but no words came out. He had expected her to cower, to apologize, to grovel, but instead, she had taken his mockery and turned it into a confrontation, one that left him speechless. Vanessa didn't let the silence linger for long. She didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing her shaken. "I'll have your steak out shortly," she said, her voice cool and collected, but her eyes burning with something far deeper than mere politeness. She didn't wait for a response, turning on her heel and walking away, leaving him with his stunned expression. As she made her way back to the kitchen, her heart was still pounding, but it wasn't from fear. It was from something else, something that had been building inside her for a long time. The feeling of standing up for herself, of finally saying enough was enough. But Vanessa wasn't done yet. She had no idea what would happen next, or what the billionaire would do. But one thing was certain: this moment, this one small act of defiance, had changed everything. Vanessa's footsteps echoed through the kitchen as she walked towards the back door, her mind racing faster than her heart could beat. The surprise of her response had shocked even her, but as the words left her mouth, something inside her shifted. The fear that had lingered in her chest for years, the fear of being looked down upon, had faded away. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of power. Her co-workers had noticed the tense exchange. There were whispers, glances, but no one dared speak up about it. Vanessa had always kept to herself. She wasn't here for friends, she was here for survival. This job, this routine, was all she had. But tonight felt different. The man's face still lingered in her mind. The way he had looked at her, as if she was a speck of dirt beneath his expensive shoes. It had infuriated her, but it had also driven her to do something she had never done before. Stand up for herself, not just to him but to everyone who had ever looked down on her. In the kitchen, the head chef, Marco, a gruff, middle-aged man with a thick Italian accent, approached her with a raised eyebrow. He'd seen the confrontation from a distance, and although he wouldn't admit it, he was impressed. "You handled that well, Vanessa," he said, his voice low. "That's not an easy crowd to deal with." Vanessa gave him a tight smile, but her mind wasn't on him. It was on the man at the table, on the way he had underestimated her, on the way he had tried to belittle her in front of everyone. Marco noticed the distance in her eyes and didn't push further. Instead, he gestured toward the window where the restaurant's valet was pulling up the next customer's car. "Go ahead and take your break, you've earned it." Vanessa nodded absently, grabbing her jacket from the coat rack. The cool night air hit her as she stepped outside, and she took a deep breath. The street was quiet, the only sound coming from the distant hum of traffic. She needed space to think, to process what had just happened. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from her best friend, Tamara. "How's work? Heard about the billionaire?" Vanessa frowned as she typed a response. "It's fine. Just a normal night. Nothing I can't handle." The text was a lie. Everything felt different now. She had always been the quiet one, the invisible one, blending into the background. But now, she was suddenly aware of the eyes that followed her every move. People like the billionaire had a way of making others feel small, like their very existence didn't matter. Vanessa had always felt that weight pressing down on her, but now it was gone. Her own voice had power, and for the first time in her life, she felt that power surge through her. But it wasn't just the billionaire that bothered her. It was everything. The years of being underestimated, the whispers behind her back, the subtle yet constant reminders that she was just another waitress, another faceless person in a sea of people who didn't matter. Her phone buzzed again, interrupting her thoughts. This time, it was the restaurant manager, David. "Vanessa, I need you to come back. The customer at table 3 is asking for you again." She sighed, shoving her phone back in her pocket. The last thing she wanted was to go back to that man, but she had a job to do. Her pride might have been bruised, but she couldn't let it get in the way of her survival. She couldn't afford to let her emotions take over. As she walked back into the restaurant, she saw the billionaire still sitting at his table, now on the phone, clearly in a heated conversation. He glanced up as she approached, his expression cool, but there was something different in his eyes. Vanessa couldn't place it, but the smugness that had been there before seemed to have faded just slightly. She wondered if her words had shaken him more than she realized. She didn't let that thought linger. She had a job to do. David nodded at her as she walked past, signaling her to go to the billionaire's table. The man had finished his call and now looked at her with an expression of forced politeness. "I assume you fixed the issue," he said, his tone flat, but the hint of arrogance was still there. He was trying to regain control of the situation, trying to reassert his dominance, but Vanessa could see through it. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked down at the table, noticing that his glass of wine was empty. Without a word, she placed a new glass in front of him, her hand steady as she poured. The man watched her, his lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm surprised," he said after a moment. "You speak Arabic, and yet you still serve tables. Seems beneath you, doesn't it?" The words stung, but Vanessa didn't let him see it. She finished pouring the wine and set the bottle down, with a soft clink, making sure to meet his gaze. "Not everything in life is about status," she replied, her voice cool. "Some of us find meaning in doing our best, no matter where we are." For a split second, she saw something flicker in his eyes, a mix of surprise and something else. But it was gone before she could make sense of it. The man quickly recovered, putting on his mask of indifference. "Well, I suppose we all have our places," he muttered. Taking a sip of his wine, Vanessa's heart beat faster, not from fear but from something else. It was the feeling of power, the kind she had always craved but never dared to take. She didn't need his approval. She didn't need anyone's approval. The more she stood her ground, the more she realized how much she had been holding back. For years. Just then, a loud voice from the other side of the room interrupted the tension. "Table 6 needs refills, and I need more napkins in the lounge," shouted the manager, David, from across the room. Without missing a beat, Vanessa gave a quick nod and turned to leave, but the billionaire's voice stopped her. "Vanessa," he said, his tone softer than before. "You know, I respect that. I thought you'd just cower. But you didn't. I may have been wrong about you." She paused, her back still to him, unsure if she wanted to hear more, but she couldn't help herself. Slowly, she turned around to face him. "Don't mistake respect for weakness," she said quietly. For a moment, he seemed taken aback, unsure of how to respond. But Vanessa didn't wait for him to speak again. She turned and walked away, leaving him with his empty glass and his half-finished meal. As she walked back to the kitchen, the weight of the moment settled into her chest, but this time it wasn't fear, it was something else. Something that felt stronger, more determined. This was only the beginning. Vanessa couldn't sleep that night. The bed felt too big, the silence too loud. She tossed and turned, her thoughts constantly circling back to the encounter with the billionaire. His words still echoed in her mind. "I may have been wrong about you." What did that even mean? Was he genuinely surprised, or was it just another attempt to manipulate her? The uncertainty gnawed at her, but she couldn't let it distract her. She had to get through tomorrow. She had to survive. The morning light peeked through the blinds, casting a soft glow over the room. Vanessa dragged herself out of bed, her body exhausted, but her mind racing. She had become a master at hiding her emotions, but today, it felt like the weight of everything was pressing down on her. She washed her face, dressed in her uniform, and pulled her hair into a tight ponytail. It was the same routine, the same steps she had taken every morning for the past few years, but today felt different. When she arrived at the restaurant, the energy in the air was tense. The regular hum of chatter was absent, replaced by an uncomfortable silence that seemed to permeate the room. Vanessa noticed that a few of her co-workers were glancing at her with strange expressions, as if they were waiting for something. She caught Marco's eye as she walked past, and he gave her a small nod of acknowledgement. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her feel like she wasn't invisible anymore. She made her way to the back to grab her apron, her mind still preoccupied with the events of last night. As she walked into the kitchen, David, the restaurant manager, was on the phone with someone. His voice was low but urgent, and he barely glanced at her as she entered. It wasn't until he hung up that he turned to face her. "Vanessa, I need you to go to table 5. The billionaire from last night is back," David said, his tone clipped. Vanessa's stomach dropped. She hadn't expected to see him again so soon, but the reality of it hit her hard. She nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "I'll handle it," she said, the words coming out more confidently than she felt. As she walked toward table 5, her heart beat faster with every step. She could already see him sitting there, his back straight, his expression unreadable. He was staring down at a menu, clearly not interested in anything around him. But when she approached, his eyes lifted, locking onto hers. For a moment, the world seemed to slow down. His gaze was intense, almost predatory, but there was something different about it now. There was no sneer, no arrogance, just a cool, calculating look that made her feel exposed. "You came back," she said before she could stop herself. His lips curved into a faint smile, but it wasn't the smug grin from the night before. This one was more like a challenge, a silent admission that he was intrigued by her. I had to. The food here is quite good, he replied smoothly. Vanessa didn't respond immediately. Instead, she set the menu down in front of him, her fingers brushing against the edge of the table. She could feel his eyes on her, studying her, and it made her skin crawl. I'll have the usual, he said after a moment, his voice laced with casual authority. She nodded, but before she could leave, he spoke again, his tone more personal this time. Tell me, Vanessa, what made you speak to me like that last night? The question caught her off guard. She turned to face him, her mind racing for a response. I don't know what you mean, she said, though she knew exactly what he was asking. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. You didn't cower, you didn't apologize. You didn't play the role I expected. Why? Vanessa felt a flicker of irritation rise within her. She wasn't some puzzle for him to solve. She wasn't here to satisfy his curiosity. I'm not here to meet your expectations, she replied coolly, her voice steady despite the anger bubbling up inside her. The billionaire's smile faltered, just for a moment, but it was enough for Vanessa to notice. He leaned back in his chair, taking a slow sip of his drink, his gaze never leaving her face. I underestimated you, he said, his voice softer than before. I thought you were just another server, someone who wouldn't challenge me. But you did. Vanessa's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't let it show. I'm just doing my job, she said. Nothing more, nothing less. The billionaire chuckled, the sound low and smooth. That's the thing about people like you, isn't it? You think you're just doing your job, but you're so much more than that. You just don't see it yet. Vanessa blinked, confused by the sudden shift in his tone. What was he getting at? What was he trying to say? But before she could press him further, he waved his hand dismissively. Forget it. Just bring me the usual, he said, his tone returning to its previous coolness. Vanessa nodded, but as she turned to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had just shifted between them. There was an underlying tension now, a complexity to their interactions that hadn't been there before. She wasn't sure what it meant, but she knew it wasn't good. As she walked back to the kitchen, her thoughts churned. Why had he said that? Why had he suddenly turned the tables on her, acting as though they were equals? She had expected him to mock her again, to belittle her, but instead, he had made her feel seen. It wasn't something she was used to. Vanessa grabbed the steak from the grill, her hands shaking slightly. She wasn't sure what to think anymore. She had expected this to be just another night of waiting on rude, entitled customers, but the billionaire had changed the game, and she didn't know if she was ready for the consequences. When she returned to his table with his food, he didn't look up immediately. Instead, he stared at the plate, examining it with the same precision he had shown when looking at her. Perfect, he muttered, then finally met her eyes. Vanessa set the plate in front of him, her fingers brushing against the edge of the table. Once again, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. You know, I didn't think you had it in you, he said, his voice softer this time. But now, I'm not so sure. She didn't know how to respond to that, so she didn't. Instead, she simply nodded and turned to leave. But as she walked away, she heard him call out to her again, his voice laced with something else. Vanessa, I'm not done with you yet. Vanessa couldn't shake the words the billionaire had said to her. I'm not done with you yet. Those words kept echoing in her mind long after she had left the table. They lingered like a heavy fog, clouding her thoughts as she moved through the rest of her shift. The usual flow of customers came and went, but none of them held her attention. It was as if the world outside of table 5 no longer mattered. Every time she glanced over, the billionaire was there, his eyes flicking up to meet hers, like a silent challenge. It wasn't the same as before. There was something more now, something almost predatory in the way he watched her. But there was also an odd familiarity, as if they shared something unspoken between them. She tried to focus on her work, tried to block him out, but it was impossible. It wasn't just about the way he had challenged her, it was about how she had responded. Something had shifted inside her, and it terrified her. When her shift finally ended, Vanessa felt drained, but it wasn't from the physical exhaustion of serving tables. No, it was the mental toll that weighed on her. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't go on like this, not when everything had changed. She walked to the back door, slipping out into the cool night air. The city was quiet, the streets bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. Vanessa felt small under the vastness of the sky, her thoughts racing, but the moment the door clicked shut behind her, she felt the weight of the world lift just a little. She had learned to take refuge in the silence of her small apartment, where no one could judge her, where no one could see her doubts. But tonight, that wasn't enough. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from Tamara. "Did you survive another night with Mr. Arrogant?" Vanessa smiled bitterly as she typed her reply. "Yeah, just about." Her mind drifted back to the billionaire, his cold stare, his smug grin, the way he had tried to control the situation. But it wasn't just that. It was the way he had looked at her, the way he had tried to read her, like she was some puzzle waiting to be solved. She sat on her couch, running her fingers through her hair, wondering what had drawn her to him. It wasn't just his arrogance, though that had certainly irked her. It wasn't even the way he had belittled her, because she had heard that before. No, it was something more, something hidden beneath the surface. But what? The answer came to her as soon as the thought crossed her mind. Power. He was powerful, and in some twisted way, she was fascinated by it. She hated it, but she was drawn to it all the same. She had spent her whole life fighting against people who thought they were better than her. And now, here was a man who had everything: wealth, influence, status, and yet, it was like he wanted to engage with her on some deeper level. Her phone buzzed again, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from the restaurant manager. "David, Vanessa, please come in early tomorrow. The billionaire requested you personally." The words hit her like a cold wave. She stared at the screen, her heart pounding in her chest. He had requested her. Why? What did he want from her? She sat there for a long moment, the phone still in her hand. The air around her seemed to grow thick, heavy with the weight of the decision she had to make. She could refuse, she could walk away. But something inside her was urging her to go, to face whatever game he was playing. The next day, Vanessa arrived at the restaurant early, her mind swirling with 1,000 possibilities. As she entered, she found the atmosphere quieter than usual. The usual buzz of activity was replaced by an odd stillness, and even the staff seemed more subdued. She made her way to the back, where she found David, who was pacing nervously. "Vanessa, I need you to handle this carefully," he said, his voice low. "The billionaire requested you. He's expecting you to take care of his table personally today." She didn't respond immediately, but nodded curtly. She had no choice. This was her job, after all. But the unease in her chest grew with every step she took toward the front of the restaurant. When she saw him, sitting there at table 5 as if he owned the place, her stomach twisted. He looked up as she approached, his eyes dark with something she couldn't place. It wasn't the arrogance she had grown used to. It was something else, something more intense. "Vanessa," he said, his voice smooth and calm. "I'm glad you could join me." She didn't know what to say, so she kept quiet, waiting for him to continue. "I wanted to apologize," he said, his words catching her off guard, "for how I treated you last night." Vanessa blinked, her breath catching in her throat. She had not expected this. She had expected another round of insults, another round of condescension. But this was different. He leaned forward, his eyes steady on hers. "I misjudged you," he continued. "I thought you were just like the others, but you're not, are you? You're different." Vanessa didn't know how to respond. She had spent so long hating people like him, people who thought they could buy anything, people who saw her as nothing more than a server, a disposable part of their world. And now here he was, apologizing, and for some reason, it made her feel vulnerable. She swallowed the lump in her throat and forced herself to speak. "I'm not here for your apology. I'm just here to do my job." The billionaire smiled, but it wasn't the smug grin from the night before. It was something softer, almost genuine. "I understand," he said, "but I don't want to make this about your job. I want to make this about you, about what you deserve." Vanessa felt a chill run down her spine. She didn't know what the game he was playing, but it was clear that she was caught in it. "I'm not interested in whatever you're offering," she said, trying to sound firm. "I just want to do my job and go home." But he wasn't backing down. "I think you're selling yourself short," he said. "You're more than just a waitress. Vanessa, you're more than what you think you are." His words struck her in a way she hadn't expected. She had always been told that she was nothing more than a worker, that she was just someone who served food and cleaned tables. But now, this man, this billionaire who had everything, was telling her she was more. It was a concept she didn't know how to process. She stood there in silence, unsure of what to say. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, watching her intently. I'm offering you a chance to change your life, to take control of your future. All you have to do is accept it. Vanessa felt the weight of his words, heavy and suffocating. She had always been told that she could never be more than this. But now, this man, this stranger who had mocked her just days before, was offering her a different kind of life, and for the first time, she wondered if she could have it. The days that followed felt like a blur to Vanessa. The offer from the billionaire had left her reeling, unable to focus on anything. She had spent her entire life avoiding people like him, building walls around herself, keeping her head down and doing the work she was told to do. But now, this man was offering her a way out, a chance to change everything. Her mind wouldn't let go of his words. You're more than just a waitress. How could he know that? How could anyone? She had never felt more invisible, more trapped in a life that seemed too small for her. But here he was, telling her that she was worth more, that she deserved more. It was too much, too fast, and yet it felt like everything she had ever wanted. But with it came a price. She wasn't sure what that price was, but she knew deep down that it wouldn't come for free. There was always a catch, always something to lose, when someone like him made an offer. Vanessa spent the next few days trying to ignore the constant buzz of her thoughts. She went to work, did her job, and tried to focus on the tasks at hand. But the billionaire's presence haunted her, even when he wasn't in the restaurant. She could feel him watching her, waiting for her to make a decision. It wasn't until a week later that the opportunity to speak with him again came. She had just finished clearing a table when she saw him sitting at his usual spot, his eyes already on her, as though he had been waiting for her. This time, there was no arrogance, no smug smile. He was just ... calm. His eyes held something more this time, an intensity that made Vanessa uneasy. She felt her heart rate increase as she approached the table, but she kept her composure. Vanessa, he greeted her, his voice quiet but purposeful. I wanted to speak with you again. I've been thinking about our last conversation. She swallowed, her throat dry, but she forced herself to maintain her usual calm exterior. I don't know what else there is to say, she replied, her voice steady but guarded. I'm here to do my job, nothing more. The billionaire leaned forward, his gaze never leaving her face. That's the thing, he said softly. I don't think you understand what's at stake here. What I'm offering isn't just a job. It's a chance to take control of your future, to make something of yourself, something bigger than this. Vanessa felt a lump form in her throat. His words were like a siren call, pulling her in despite every instinct telling her to run. She wanted to tell him no, to walk away, but the truth was, she didn't want to. She had spent her life scraping by, doing whatever she could to survive, but never imagining a life outside the small world she had built for herself. I don't know if I can trust you, Vanessa said finally, the words slipping out before she could stop them. People like you, they don't offer things without expecting something in return. What do you want from me? The billionaire's lips quirked into a slight smile, but there was no amusement in it. I want nothing from you, Vanessa, he said, his tone firm, sincere. I want to see you succeed. I want to see you become who you were meant to be. She shook her head, unable to believe him. And how can I trust that? You don't even know me. His smile softened, and for the first time, she saw a glimpse of something real in his eyes. I know more than you think. I see the way you work, the way you carry yourself. You're not like the others. You have potential, and I don't want you to waste it. Vanessa's mind was spinning. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust him, to believe that someone like him could actually care about someone like her. But the weight of the world on her shoulders felt too heavy to ignore. She had to protect herself, had to keep her guard up. I can't just change everything, she said quietly, almost to herself. I've spent my whole life learning how to survive in this world. I don't know if I can trust that you'll actually help me. The billionaire's gaze never wavered, but his expression softened, almost in understanding. I don't expect you to trust me right away, he said gently, but you have a choice. You can keep living this life, playing by the rules, working for people who don't see you, or you can take a chance. You can bet on yourself for once, Vanessa. For a moment, there was nothing but silence between them. The weight of his words hung in the air, and Vanessa found herself lost in the possibility. She had never allowed herself to dream like this before. The idea of something more, something better, felt like a distant fantasy. something only the lucky or the powerful ever got to experience. But the truth was, she had been living in a fantasy all along, pretending that this life, this job, was all she deserved. She had convinced herself that this was the only reality she would ever know. But the billionaire's words cut through the veil she had carefully placed around herself. Maybe it was time to stop pretending. Maybe it was time to let go of her fears and take a leap. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can trust myself." "You don't have to be ready," he replied, his voice low but firm. "You just have to take the first step. I'll be here when you do." Vanessa stood there for a long moment, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She wanted to walk away, to tell him no and protect herself from whatever he was offering, but deep down, she knew that she couldn't. She couldn't ignore the feeling stirring inside her, the desire to break free from the cage she had built around herself. "Okay," she said, her voice trembling with the weight of her decision. "I'll do it. I'll take the chance." The billionaire's smile finally reached his eyes, and for a brief moment, he looked almost human, not the arrogant, untouchable man she had seen before, but someone who genuinely cared. "Good," he said softly. "You won't regret it." Vanessa wasn't so sure about that, but for the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. It was a fragile thing, barely a flicker, but it was there, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start. As she turned to leave, she felt a strange sense of resolve settle in her chest. She had taken the first step. Now, there was no turning back. The days that followed felt like a whirlwind to Vanessa. Her life had shifted in a way she never expected. Every morning, she walked into the restaurant, but it no longer felt like home. The routine she had clung to for so long was starting to feel foreign, as though she had outgrown it overnight. And every time she walked into the dining room, she couldn't help but glance toward table 5. The billionaire was still there, but now, he wasn't just another customer. He was a reminder of the choice she had made. It had been a week since she had agreed to his offer, a week since she had decided to take a chance on something bigger. At first, the idea of leaving everything behind, of stepping out of the life she had known, seemed terrifying. But now, as the days passed, something else began to grow inside her. Confidence, hope, a sense that she wasn't just a part of the background anymore. She was someone who mattered. The billionaire, whose name she had still yet to learn, had kept his word. He had kept his distance, but he had made it clear that he was ready to help her. Every night, as she served him his dinner, there was a quiet understanding between them. It was like he was watching her closely, waiting for her to take the next step. And tonight, it seemed, was the night. Vanessa was walking across the restaurant floor when she saw him again. His usual seat at table 5 was empty, and her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't like him to not show up. Not after everything he had said to her. Not after the offer he had made. She glanced around, her pulse quickening. Had he changed his mind? Had he given up on her? But just as quickly, she saw him at the bar, sitting in a dark corner, alone. His gaze met hers immediately, a silent invitation. With a deep breath, she walked toward him, every step heavier than the last. She knew that this moment would change everything. She had to be ready for whatever came next. "Vanessa," he greeted her as she approached, his voice calm and steady. But there was something in his eyes that made her pause. There was a seriousness there, a weight that she hadn't seen before. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft. He nodded slowly, but there was a shadow in his eyes. "I've been thinking," he said, his words slow, measured. "I think it's time we talk about the next steps." Vanessa felt a knot form in her stomach. The next steps. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking again. "You said you wanted a chance to change your life. I'm giving it to you. But now you need to take control. You need to decide what comes next." The words hit her harder than she expected. She had thought about this, of course. She had thought about leaving the restaurant, starting something new, something bigger. But the reality of it, the weight of the decision, felt much heavier now that it was standing right in front of her. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do," Vanessa said, her voice cracking just slightly. "I've spent so long just surviving. I don't know how to thrive. I don't know how to live without constantly worrying about the next thing." The billionaire leaned forward, his eyes softening with something that almost resembled empathy. "No one ever teaches us how to live without fear," he said quietly, "but that's what I want to help you with. You don't have to do this alone. Vanessa felt a tear slip down her cheek before she could stop it. She quickly wiped it away, embarrassed, but the billionaire didn't seem to notice. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. He slid it across the table to her, his fingers brushing against hers for a brief moment. "Take this," he said gently. "It's a number you can call any time. It's my personal assistant. He'll help you with whatever you need, whatever you want to do next." Vanessa stared at the card for a moment, unsure of what to say. The thought of leaving everything behind, of stepping into a life she had only dreamed of, was terrifying. But she knew deep down that she couldn't stay in the same place forever. "I don't know if I can do this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You already have," the billionaire replied quietly. "Taking the first step is always the hardest, but you've already done it. All you have to do now is keep moving forward." Vanessa's hands shook as she picked up the card. She had no idea what was waiting for her on the other side of this decision, but for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was alone. She didn't feel like she was trapped in a life she didn't choose. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'll call when I'm ready." The billionaire nodded, his face unreadable. "I'll be here when you do." As Vanessa turned to leave, her heart was pounding in her chest. The weight of the decision was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. It was a feeling she had never known before, hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, she could create the life she wanted. She walked through the restaurant, her mind racing, her heart filled with uncertainty and excitement. When she reached the kitchen, she grabbed her coat and started walking toward the door. She needed space to think. She needed to clear her mind. But just as she stepped outside, a voice called out to her, "Vanessa." She turned to see the billionaire standing at the door, his figure framed by the dim light inside. He took a step toward her, his gaze steady. "I know this isn't easy," he said, his voice low, "but I believe in you, and I think you're ready. Just take the leap." And with that, he was gone, disappearing back into the restaurant. Vanessa stood there for a long moment, his words ringing in her ears. She didn't know what was next, but she knew one thing for sure. This was her chance to build something new, to become who she was meant to be. And this time, she wasn't going to let fear control her anymore. The end.